What's up, everyone? Welcome back, and Celtics are back. Preseason's not quite here yet. Of course, the regular season not too far away, but training camp and all of the wonderful, fluffy interviews that you come to expect this time of year. Everybody's in the best shape of their lives. Everyone's 0-0 and has a chance to contend and all that good stuff. Where do the Celtics realistically fall into all of this? We'll get into it. Adam Kaufman, Chris Grenham. Chris, it's great to have you back on the show. I'm not sure you and I together have ever done one of these. Evan Valenti, I know, who of course is typically with us. You've talked to him, you've come on, but I was looking, the last time you were on Celtics Beat was back sometime in February. So at that point, I mean, Evan Fournier was still with the Magic. Jaylen Brown hadn't hurt his wrist yet. You know, Jayson Tatum's still using an inhaler. I mean, it was a different world back then. So it's good to have you back now.
It was a different world. I think this is a better world now where, things are a little more situated, but it was a much different basketball world. But thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Danny Ainge was still in charge and Brad Stevens was the head coach. We know how that has gone. So the new Pobo is Stevens, as people have, come to learn. We've talked a lot about it on this program. Ime Udoka is the new head coach. And now that we're finally getting into camp and practices are underway. And I know there's only so much that you guys are able to watch when you're down there. And obviously you're paying attention, you're listening, you're getting a feel for the guy beyond just those introductory press conferences when he was hired and whatever we've been able to gauge from his experience with Team USA. But what do you find you're learning about Ime Udoka this early on?
I think he's a tough coach, but I think it's, there's an element of tough empathy there where he's a player's coach and guys really like him, but he holds people accountable. And that's sort of been his reputation in Brooklyn and Philly and San Antonio. A lot of guys that come out of Pop's system, that's kind of their MO. But I think it's going to fit well because it's different than Brad Stevens. Jaylen Brown talked about it at Media Day. He was like, tough coaching from Brad isn't really tough coaching. And that's not a bad thing. That's just the way it is. Brad Stevens isn't a guy that's going to really get in your face, kind of hold you accountable. Sure, he can get fired up at times, but Ime Udoka, I think, is a little bit different. A lot of guys have talked about that tough coaching element. Like you said, a lot of this stuff sort of gets overblown in training camp a little bit. Like there's talking points. And with Ime Udoka, it's the tough coaching element. And yeah, that is going to be a difference maker, but I think it's going to take some time for us to really tell some of the main differences between him and Brad Stevens.
I'm boiling it down here in an unfair way to be, just upfront. But, the way you just described it, it's almost like it sounds like Brad Stevens is, more the psychological coach. I've made the running joke forever about, like he's your prototypical life coach. Like if I could have Brad just telling me how to live my days and give me those pep talks every morning when I wake up, that would be wonderful. But then Ime Udoka, it's almost like it's a louder version. It's more X's and O's. Like you said, it's more in your face. And we'll come to see exactly what all that means. We've heard the reputation and obviously this guy has been beloved at all of his stops. He's got the ultimate respect of players, and LaMarcus Aldridge chose San Antonio largely because of Udoka and Al Horford and Josh Richardson. These guys have spent time with him in other places. So he is a guy who is obviously well respected, but taking, I guess, the in your face thing a little bit further, what does that mean? I mean, what should these players expect when you say it's going to be harder coaching?
I think Enes Kanter put it pretty well following the second day of practice yesterday. He said that he's not going to tell you what you want to hear. He's going to tell you what you need to hear. And I think, of course, Brad Stevens would do that on occasion, but I think Udoka makes a point to do that. He makes a point of accountability. He makes a point of kind of telling you exactly what you need, whether you like it or not. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good change. If a coach is around for long enough, after a while, like in any professional dynamic, that kind of grows old at times. And sometimes you do need to freshen things up and you need a new voice in there. So I think Kanter saying he's going to tell you what you need to hear is a good thing. Maybe it's little things like at the end of practice the other day, they were shooting free throws to determine if they were going to keep running at the end of practice. I covered Brad Stevens for a while. I don't ever remember seeing that. Maybe they did do that, but just little things like that I think make a difference in sort of changing the locker room dynamic, changing the dynamic of a team. And I think that's important because the Celtics, I think, they were in need of that following last season.
See, that's why Evan and I, every handful of shows or so, we don't work together. Just voices get stale.
Shake things up.
Another after a little while. Yeah, you got to mix it up. How much do you think? We spent a lot of time over the course of last year and into the offseason before the changes. I guess there wasn't much of an offseason before the changes. A lot of it happening right after that Nets series loss. But we fixated on this issue quite a bit. Maybe you have in the past as well. Just different voices in general, not just the head coach. Like this. if we had this conversation when you were on the last time around, like I would have thought it was absolutely insane to suggest Brad Stevens would not be the head coach of this team this year, but I absolutely thought there would be changes to his bench, new voices, veteran NBA players, sort of the Walter McCarty type more so than the Evan Turner type. As we know, Udoka played in the league. Damon Stoudemire obviously is a guy that jumps out. When you're looking at just the overall changes strictly to the bench, not front office, not the team and depth and all of that, just the bench, how much of a transformation do you expect here from the Stevens regime and all of those coaches that are for the most part now gone, basically with the exception of like Joe Mazzulla, to what we have now?
Yeah, I think there's certainly going to be a change. I don't think it's going to be visible immediately because I think that stuff takes time with coaching staff, and coaches have to, whether you're an assistant like David Stoudemire or Ime Udoka as a head coach, it takes a while to sort of instill your new practices on guys, because guys like Marcus Smart, they have only been coached by Brad Stevens in the NBA. It's their only NBA coach. So a lot of those habits are going to be, instilled in them, and it's second nature to them. So those changes are going to take time. That being said, it's gonna make a change, and that's inevitable just because, for the most part, like you said, outside of guys like Joe Mazzulla, Evan Brads, there's a lot of new faces in there, and I think that's a good thing because the Celtics were kind of running in circles a little bit. I thought Marcus Smart's interview with Jay King from The Athletic was pretty interesting. He noted that he was pretty sure Brad Stevens was getting tired of coaching and was getting ready to leave, and the only reason he stuck around last year was for the guys. And if Marcus Smart knew that, Jaylen Brown probably knew that, Jayson Tatum probably knew that. So it certainly was a need for this team to freshen up the coaching staff quite a bit. And I think it's a good thing. And I think the dynamic is going to change in terms of being able to see that from a fan's perspective. I just think that might take a little bit of time, and that's okay.
I'm going to pick on our buddy Keith Smith, who obviously does an amazing job covering the team and the entire league. And, he wrote an article, he put it out today for Celtics blog about how, if there's one clear theme about this team here early in camp and media day and all of that, this is Jayson Tatum's and Jaylen Brown's team. And, I come out of that. And in fairness, I haven't read the article yet, so I'm sure he went more in depth, but just looking at how it was promoted and the headline and all of that, I come out of it and I say, well, I mean, obviously, no crap. Like we've been here on this show, we've been talking about that for a year plus. Like last year, it wasn't Kemba Walker's team anymore. It was Jayson Tatum's team. It was Jaylen Brown's team. Now, maybe again, I haven't read it, so maybe what Keith wrote was more expansive with respect to, now Brad's not in the picture and it's a new head coach and it's just all of this versus just these two all-stars, borderline all-NBA players taking that next step. But I guess to build on that, what I wonder is, what we've heard from these guys like Jayson Tatum going back to Team USA and winning a gold medal, and Udoka being an assistant with that team. Obviously, we know, like, he's talked a lot about Udoka and he's all in. And now hearing it from Jaylen Brown, who is talked about buying in, he's got his full attention and all of that. Horford has shouted him out. Smart, having had experience with him back at FIBA a couple of years ago, has talked about Udoka's leadership. When you have, especially those first two, the quote unquote pillars of this team, going so above and beyond talking about their respect for Ime Udoka before he's coached even a single preseason game, how much does that filter down to the rest of the team?
I think it certainly filters down to the rest of the team, but also if you were on, I think it's obvious that they're going to do that right early on because it's their new boss. Well, yeah, you're going to say good things about your new boss first couple of days. I think it makes sense. You'd expect them to do that, but I do think it filters down because those guys are the pillars. And whether it was the case or not in years past, they are now the two main guys. I think sometimes over the last couple of years, yeah, it was very clear that it was Tatum and Brown's team from the outside. And Kemba Walker could say that as much as he wanted, but there was always the little look over their shoulder because there's an all-star, a 9-year, 8-year vet in there who was also pretty prominent. So I think now that they are the two voices, hearing those guys voice their support and really show that they are really, really behind Ime Udoka. Like you said, Jaylen Brown was super vocal about that. I think it's important. You hear guys like Marcus Smart say it. I think it's really important, especially for some of the younger guys, but it's a good locker room dynamic, it seems like, because a lot of these vets that Brad Stevens brought in, they have some experience with Udoka. They're also bought in, but it's just a nice kind of filter or filler, I should say, to have underneath Brown and Tatum as those young pillars.
one of the overarching themes, and that being the positivity for Udoka, and of course this team being that two-headed monster. But there are a lot of secondary or periphery type of elements to this club that people have been talking a lot about here early in camp. What has stood out to you most?
I think Al Horford has stood out to me most. I mean, he is very fired up to be back with the Celtics. He's coming off a couple weird seasons. It didn't work out in Philadelphia after taking that contract. That was just kind of a mess across the board for that team. Then he went to Oklahoma City. They had him sit out because they wanted to lose games. So he kind of had an extended offseason there, almost like a mini training camp at the end of the year for him. So now that he's back in a situation where he feels comfortable, he likes the guys around him, he can be a presence in the locker room. He's the oldest guy by a mile on this team. I think he's really fired up and he seems really excited. He was talking about how when the Celtics were pursuing Dennis Schroeder, he was calling Brad Stevens saying, do we actually have a shot? Can we get him? I didn't realize he was that tight with Schroeder. It sounds like they have a really good relationship from when they played together in Atlanta. But overall, through the first couple of days here, it's very clear that he's very, very excited to be back here. And he seems like he's really looking forward to the season. I also think he's going to be a real game changer for the Celtics. I think having that ball moving big is a really, really big thing for them next to Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum. But Al Horford is the one that's really stuck out to me over the first couple of days of camp.
Something interesting too is, all of the talk, and you mentioned obviously Marcus Smart talking to Jay King, all of the emphasis on him being this clear number one point guard for the team. That's how he slots in. He's replacing Kemba Walker. He is going to be in that role after getting the big payday, that big contract, and is a very good playmaker. I think that if there's one thing, people who are sort of the casual fans that don't watch often, don't pay attention, the people that just like to gripe about the number of threes he takes, or not letting the shot clock run down and taking bad shots or heat checks or whatever it may be, totally undervalue it or borderline don't even pay attention to the fact this guy's a very, very good playmaker. And this is an opportunity, obviously, to see that. I'm very curious to see, if or how Udoka sort of reins in his offensive approach when it comes to shooting and has him fixate more on playmaking. But on the topic of Horford, that's another thing that was said, is that this offense is going to really run through Horford as a bigger playmaker. And look, that is something that was the case when he was here the first go around. Brad Stevens talked a lot about it back then. How do you think this offense is going to operate when, we're looking at those two guys, and obviously neither one of them are the two that you're leaning on for all the offense?
Yeah, to your points on Smart to start, I think he's going to really, really thrive in this role because he has a defined role. Yeah, he's always been one of the point guards under Brad Stevens, but he's kind of been that sixth man, quasi starter, do whatever the team needs. And I think a lot of that has led to some of the offensive antics that sometimes bother the casual fan, where he's in there with the second unit, so he wants to get his shots up and whatever. I think now that he has this more defined role that he has mentioned in the past is important to him, being a starter and having that role be clearly defined is important to him. I think naturally that's going to rein in some of his shooting and make him that playmaker, that facilitator on the floor. And I think that's really important for this team because he's a really good facilitator. Like you said, he led the team in assists last year. He's smart at finding the open guy. He makes good decisions out there when it comes to being a passer, when it comes to being that playmaker. But I think they have a lot of guys that they can run the offense through. You can operate with Smart as that primary ball handler. Having Horford at the top of the key, running the offense through him. They tried to do it a couple times late in the season with Rob Williams last year, and it actually worked on occasion. Rob Williams is a really good passer, but Al Horford is a natural playmaker as a big man, and they did it when he was here before under Stevens, and they'll certainly do it again this time. I just think that opens up a world of possibilities for the Celtics offensive dynamic because they didn't have a lot of ball movers last year outside of Smart. And of course, Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, they're not particularly ball movers. They're the end game, which is what they're supposed to be. But now that you add in a guy like Al Horford, who realistically, even at his age, is still a matchup nightmare for opposing teams, it really changes the dynamic for the Celtics offense because you need guys to move the ball to ultimately get open Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Al Horford can do that. So I think it really helps just to have the added ball movement because there was too many stagnant stretches with the offense last year where, like Ime Udoka said, you stop the first action from the Celtics and it just goes right to isolation. It's game over. That's
Yeah,
going to
he
be
said
much tougher to do.
enough of the one-on-ones. I mean,
Right.
we've been talking about that for years.
Yeah.
It's been infuriating to watch. It was whether it's been Tatum, whether it's been Brown, whether it was Kyrie Irving when he was here. It's just always been sort of a part of that offense, part of the NBA offense. It's not unique to the Celtics, obviously, and it's not good team basketball. It's not fun to watch. So it sort of fits back into, again, some of the early themes, things that the players are working on in practice, things that they've been talking about with all of you. Uh, Pace, defense, the emphasis on these two things going into a new season, and stuff that Brad Stevens always talked about as well. So like these aren't revolutionary topics by any stretch, but for whatever reason, last year in particular, obviously, defense went to hell, and it's not even like they didn't have the defensive talent. They just, whether it was lack of continuity and chemistry and man games lost and COVID and all of the different factors that went into last year, and pace, same deal. It wasn't what you expected it to be really the last couple of years. What should we be looking for this season in those two areas?
Well, I think the pace is going to be up. Jaylen Brown talked about that. He said he wants to play fast. I mean, every NBA player wants to play fast in today's game just because it's the positionless style of play where you can really run. That wasn't an option for a lot of teams even 10 years ago, but now it is. So Jaylen Brown made a point to emphasize that after the second practice the other day. And I think that's probably going to be something. I think the aggression on defense is certainly going to be up quite a bit because this team has the potential to be a top 5 defensive team in the league without question. They have a lot of versatility, but they have length and speed along the perimeter. So their ball pressure is going to be much better than it was last year. Like you said, last year across the board, whether it was that lack of continuity, COVID year, whatever, it was a wacky year. There was barely any ball pressure for various stretches. And that was a problem. This year, because of that defensive versatility, the length and speed on the perimeter is really going to cause headaches for teams. So I think that's going to be the main like eye-opening thing early on is that ball pressure is going to be really, really, pretty high compared to last year.
Tatum last year, Chris, of course, 26, almost 27 points per game, an all-star, should have been all NBA. He was snubbed there, lost out on a lot of cash in the process. One of the things is just music to my damn ears that he has been talking about here early on. And I've been like, look back on my Twitter, how many times I've been harping or advocating for this. Him talking about wanting to go downhill more, go to the free throw line more, get more opportunities. Last year, 5.3 trips to the line per game. And of course, that's singular free throws. It's not, he's getting there for 5 times and he's taken 10 per. He's taken 5.3 attempts per game last year, and a very good free throw shooter, by the way. If we can just get him there 7, 8 times per game, it's very reasonable. It's very possible, makes him close to, if not at, a 30-point per game guy as well. I just think it's incredibly realistic. It's been the part of his game that has been, I don't want to say missing necessarily, but it has been inconsistent. It's come in those, handful of game stretches, and then it disappears for a little while. It brings the average down. What are the chances that this goes beyond just being talk and we see Jayson Tatum getting to the line 7, 8 times per game this year?
I think there's a really good chance of it. I mean, you saw the pictures of him bulking up over the offseason. Again, that's classic offseason content, but he is bigger. And I think they made a point, him and Drew Hanlon, to work on that this offseason. I think a fan a couple weeks ago tweeted at Drew Hanlon and asked him, what was the point of emphasis this offseason with Tatum? And he said, getting downhill. And so that obviously turns into free throws. And that's going to be very necessary for him to take that next step in his game. And I think it's leading to that point. Like you said, the free throw numbers have been trending upward for him over the last couple of years, but he's still 23 years old. And up to this point in his career, he's that finesse scorer. He's not a rumble scorer. He's not a guy who can bully his way to the basket. Well, he can, but he hasn't to this point in his career. When he's at Chaminade and Duke coming up, as he developed as a basketball player, he was that finesse perimeter scorer. So it's second nature for him to fall back on that, right? Making the adjustment to be that downhill rumble scorer, draw the contact, draw the fouls, get to the line. That's not natural for him. So he's been making that adjustment. And I think it's trending in the right direction to have those free throws continue to add up. And I think because of his muscle gain, because of what he's been working on this summer with Drew Hanlon, I think it's extremely likely. And they're going to need it too, because this team is limited on offense outside of him and Jaylen Brown. So they're going to need Jayson Tatum to get to the line. And I think it's pretty likely that it's going to be more so than in years past.
We've had a lot of conversation on this show over the offseason about these two guys. Really not, I mean, for years. It hasn't been limited to the last couple of months about just, how they coexist. And it's a lot of people talk about it. I really like now that even Jaylen Brown is talking about it. He was asked about it, obviously, at training camp, early stages here. And, I made note of some of the things that he said because I thought they were so interesting. Like Jayson Tatum gets asked about this and he just kind of, we're friends. We like each other. We play well, but that's about, I mean, Jayson Tatum, he's just not the best interview is, and I think that's by choice, not because he can't be, he just doesn't feel like saying much. Jaylen Brown opts to be much more expansive, which, in our position we enjoy, but, talking about their relationship, said it's based around respect for one another. He called Tatum one of the greats in the game. He hopes to obviously become that as well for himself. Media, he acknowledged, likes to pit them against one another, sort of a Batman and Robin thing, as opposed to just, why can't we both be two great players on the same team? They root for one another. They can absolutely coexist. They trust one another. There's a total buy-in. They're just two guys who can hoop. He hopes they can be the best version of themselves, on and on and on. How much do you like hearing this? It's again, it's common sense to know it. I think in a lot of different ways. Like we don't have to be driving Brown out of town hoping to get Karl Anthony Towns here or whatever it may, that type of offseason hot takey kind of discussion that ends up happening. How much do you like hearing him acknowledge the look, we're good here, guys?
Yeah, hearing him acknowledge it's reassuring. I mean, I think for people who follow the team closely, who are around the team a decent amount, it's obvious that they coexist. You're right. Jayson Tatum, like Bill Belichick would love Jayson Tatum. He just doesn't really say much about anything. So you're not really going to get a whole lot out of him. So it was good to hear some of the things from Jaylen Brown yesterday. I mean, I think it's a normal professional dynamic. You have people, I'm sure, at work who you're friends with. You respect them. You get along with them. You're cool with them, but you don't hang out every day. And that's okay. You can still coexist at work and be very good counterparts. Like, I think that's okay. And I think that's always been the case with Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum. Like, they don't have to be best friends. For whatever reason, I think in modern day sports, people want, when you have two big dogs at the top of a roster like this, they want them to be best friends and do everything together and whatever. That's just not the case. And that's okay because they are friends and they do coexist together. And Jaylen Brown's right. They're two guys who are good at ball and they can hoop, and two guys who can hoop can coexist. So I think that's okay. I think it's a very normal professional dynamic. It's not like they don't like each other. So I think everything, based around the respectful nature of their relationship that Jaylen Brown said yesterday was spot on. It was important. And I think it hopefully will shoot down some of, the sports radio dynamics that jump up that say, hey, these two guys, they can't coexist and whatever, because people do throw those narratives out there. But hopefully Jaylen Brown's, thoughtful answer yesterday will kind of shoot some of those down heading into the season.
I wonder too, and this is something that I guess I haven't thought about until just now. How much does, you can look at all of the different things you said are absolutely true. And you can, I think it's a good way to sort of present it in more relatable terms to people out there. And, your workplace, my workplace, whoever's listening, your workplace out there as well. And of course, like you said, there can be those people you coexist with well, you work with them well, but of course there's an element of competition in, especially if you have a similar role, you're whatever, you're looking for the best cases, you're looking for the best stories, you're looking for paint it however you want, obviously. But this is the first time where now they've both got the contract. Now like Tatum's not out there trying to, maximize his deal. Brown's not out there trying to maximize his deal, obviously endorsements, whatever else, prestige of individual accomplishments, like being an all-star, like being all NBA, like being whatever. But these guys have their money. Like the financial component of it, which is so big, is done for a period of years at this point, barring something crazy. How much does that factor in when it comes to, okay, like now we can kind of take a deep breath and relax a little bit together as one?
I think it certainly plays a factor because whether they say it or not, if they're approaching a contract year or something like that, guys are going to try to get their touches. They got to raise that value. And I think that's natural. So I think maybe at times where it seemed like maybe Jaylen or Jayson pre-extension they wanted a couple more touches. They were unhappy when they didn't get their touches. Maybe that did pop up at times. I think it's much less likely to do so now, where they can just focus on, the team. And I think they're, for the most part, the two of them are pretty good at doing that regardless. Even leading up to the contracts with both of them, they were pretty good. There wasn't too many selfish tendencies. It's just kind of people see the isolation style sometimes and they go toward the selfish angle. That's just the way they play. It's not really a selfish thing. But I do think that having their contracts settled and everything, it does take some of those external elements out of it, which is important. And I think it makes it easier. And there's always going to be the healthy intra-squad competition. And I think that's natural because they're two guys who are similar size, play the wing. And I think that's a great thing. Casual fans on the outside might look in and say they're the same player. They can't play together. But in the modern game, it's actually advantageous to have them together. But I agree with you. I do think taking the contract stuff out of the picture does kind of eliminate some of those, external threats, if you will.
Let's take one last break to tell you, of course, if you're watching the video, you can see it. This show is brought to you in part by Legends Brand. That's what this sweatshirt is that I'm wearing. It is it is almost beyond comprehension how comfortable this sweatshirt is. This is not even one of the talking points. I'm just telling you this. I slid this thing on. I'm just feeling loose, feeling fit. I'm feeling good. You might even think I work out because it's sleek. It's form-fitting. I don't. It's a compliment to the sweatshirt. It'll make you look like you're in shape. It's the best. The Legends brand. It's an athlete-owned apparel brand that is popping up seemingly everywhere these days, including, of course, many pro locker rooms and on some of today's top athletes. We're talking Steve Nash, Matt Barnes, Baker Mayfield, NFL legend, local hero, Willie McGinnis. I realize not all these guys are still playing, but they are all involved with Legends brand. Evan Valenti, I guarantee he is wearing his sweatshirt right now. Even though he's not part of this show, he wears the thing every single day. He gets up in the morning, he takes his dog out for a walk in the sweatshirt, he gets back into bed in the sweatshirt, he goes to work in the sweatshirt. What I'm saying, Legends, is we need more sweatshirts because Evan just can't wash the shirt as frequently as he has been. I'm concerned about him. He doesn't do anything else. It's constant. Wash the Legend shirt, put it on, wash it again, put it back on. We're going to need more swag. Send it out. We love you. And I hope that is apparently and abundantly clear. So visit legends.com today. See why athletes everywhere are swapping out their big box brands for Legends apparel. Use our promo code. It is BEAT20, BEAT 20, the numbers. That is, again, BEAT20. Save 20% on your first order. Again, that is legends.com. Promo code BEAT20. Offer ends October 10th, which is rapidly approaching. Chris, we got to get you in the Legends family.
I would love to. Give me a sweatshirt. I'm in.
You see, this is what I'm talking about. More and more people talking you up, Legends. Let's get in. All right, we've been talking a lot of Celtics stuff, and I feel like we can't conclude this show without talking about what is, I don't know, do I even call it the elephant in the room? I'm not sure that's accurate because everyone's talking about this, and that is, of course, the vaccination issue in the NBA. Now, 90+% of players at this point in time are vaccinated across the league. Not everyone for every single team. I don't know how many teams are 100%. Not many, probably. The Celtics are not 100%. Josh Richardson is not vaccinated. I don't know if anyone else on the team is publicly unvaccinated at this point. Now, this is, I'm not going to use this platform to get on a soapbox and say, like, you need to go out and get your vaccine. I mean, I'm pro-vaccination with regard to this COVID shot. I do believe if you are unvaccinated, you should be vaccinated, but that's not the point of us talking about this right here. My sort of one of the things just keeps rattling around my head, Chris, is that the NBA, to its credit, is trying to make this more and more difficult for players who are unvaccinated after mandating that, coaches and staffers across the league and that basically everybody involved in the NBA be vaccinated, a mandated vaccination. But it can't do that with the players because the players have their union. It's a very strong union. The union rejects that, and not everybody is buying in. However, what the league is doing is saying if you miss games because you are unvaccinated, you get COVID or whatever it is, you can't play in New York, you can't play in the Bay Area against Golden State, you're unvaccinated, causes you to miss games due to market mandates or sickness or whatever it may be, you're not going to get paid. And so I guess just anyone, whether it's Kyrie Irving, and this is not me attacking Kyrie or anybody else, because I've done plenty of that on this show, I know, but anybody else out there who is either opted to not get vaccinated or is playing the game, which is what, I guess I refer to it as the game of, well, it's a personal issue, I'm not going to tell you. I think that's stupid. If you're not going to get vaccinated, you're not going to get vaccinated, and that's your call. I don't agree with it, but it's your call. To say it's a personal issue, I'm not telling, that's just dumb, because we're going to know soon. We're going to know soon whether you're vaccinated or not based on what games you are allowed to play in. If all of a sudden you're not playing in New York and you're not playing in Golden State and you're not hurt, we're going to know you're not vaccinated. All right. So you may as well just put it out there. If you're going to wear it as this badge of honor that you don't believe in it, you're not going to get vaccinated. Just say it. Just say it. Just offer your stance and say you got to do your research and whatever it is and move on. I just think that it's really interesting the way the NBA is continuing in its own way to try and crack down. I feel like a lot more of these players are going to, for lack of a better word, Chris, cave, because they don't want to lose all that money. Stephen A. Smith, Sage Steele, from ESPN, very prominent personalities over at that network who have been vocal about not wanting the vaccine, but they said, you know what, I got it because I wanted to go to work and I couldn't go to work if I didn't get the vaccine. So that's where it's at. I feel like that is the direction ultimately the NBA is trying to force the players' hand. And I do think we're going to get there.
Yeah, I think you're right. They are certainly making it as difficult as possible for these guys who are holding out. And it's extra difficult for the guys in those markets, in the Bay Area, in New York City, like Kyrie Irving, like Wiggins. But it's also elements of they have to get to practice far earlier because they have to do testing. They have to have a locker very far away from their vaccinated teammates. They can't go out with their vaccinated teammates. They're basically on lockdown when they're on the road, similar to what they were last year. And the players talked about it again and again, how much that sucked. They're like, it's terrible. So they're going to make it very, very difficult. You're right. We're going to find out with a lot of these guys quite quickly what their vaccination status is, just because they're going to play or not. I'm not quite clear on the visiting player, regulations in terms of, is Josh Richardson going to be able to play in opening night? I think it sounds like visiting players might not have to abide by those same rules. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure there'll be some clarity as we go through the next month here, but I think they are making it really tough on some of these players. And I do think there's going to be plenty that, for lack of a better term, cave, because look at Kyrie Irving. We went through the thing with him not talking to the media. He said, I'm not talking to the media because they're all pawns. All right. So the NFL or the NBA fined him a ton of money. And a week later, he was talking to the media. So I wouldn't be surprised if a similar thing goes down with players and their vaccination status, just because life is going to be pretty difficult for them. And I mean, it's tough because if you're the Celtics right now, you're one of the teams with a decent number of players, it sounds like, that are unvaccinated at the moment. And as twisted as it sounds, because it's a health matter rather than a basketball matter, but it's a competitive disadvantage. Mm-hmm. So I think there are some guys that are going to get in camp here again at the preseason, and it might click for some of them to say, hey, we're going to be in trouble if, we get hit with a couple COVID clusters or whatever, and we all have to sit out, and suddenly we're at a dramatic disadvantage compared to a team like the Timberwolves or the Lakers who are 100% vaccinated. That's a problem. And especially when they start losing game checks, that's an additional problem. So I do hope, for the sake of everyone in the league and the staffers who have families and stuff who are vaccinated, that some of these guys do ultimately cave and do ultimately get the vaccine, because I think, one, I'm in the camp that it is for the greater good here, but two, from a team standpoint, it's a competitive advantage to be 100% vaccinated. And Brad Stevens and Ime Udoka did voice that, saying, we hope by the start of the season we're as close to 100% as possible, because they know damn well it's a big advantage heading into the season if most of your players are vaccinated.
Well, and to that point, just to go a step further, like Stevens obviously was the head coach last year and went through hell with this team missing more COVID games than any other team in the NBA by a pretty wide margin. And I realize not everyone, who's here now was here last year. Like Richardson was not here last year. He didn't go through it, but Marcus Smart did. And Marcus Smart was one of the guys on media day saying, yeah, I mean, I wasn't totally sold on getting the vaccine, but my word's not his. I didn't want to screw the team. I know what we went through last year, and I didn't want to cause the team any issues. And I guess even if you're putting your own personal health aside and you're looking at it from the standpoint of the greater good, like you said, for your employer and everything else, I respect that. I respect that he is putting team first over, like Facebook science right now.
Right. And if that's what it takes to get some of these guys to do it, then by all means, put it in a basketball perspective and say, hey, you're going to screw your team over if you get COVID with a couple other guys in the middle of the season and they're short players and have a short bench and whatever. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes in my mind. I know it, again, this is a matter of public health. It's not a matter of basketball, but if that's the difference maker, then that's what it is. Because right now it's the Celtics are objectively at a disadvantage to other teams right now. And I think Brad Stevens and Ime Udoka kind of danced around it at media day when they were asked about it, but you can read through what they were saying to say, yeah, this could be trouble for us at some point. And they're a little bit handcuffed because of the CBA, right? Because the CBA at this point and those negotiations have kind of given players the right to decide. And that leaves coaches and front office people in a weird spot where they can't really say how they feel because they're a little bit handcuffed. But I think it's very clear that the Celtics are at a bit of a disadvantage right now, and time will tell if that gets solved or not.
You mentioned too some of the sort of unclear rules right now. I saw a friend of mine tweet out the other day. This will, put your mind into a pretzel a little bit. Like, all right, so with the home regulations, not clear for visitors right now, like Kyrie Irving. All right, well, so as of right this moment, let's say he doesn't get vaccinated, so he can't play Nets home games. Can he play Knicks road games? Those are both in New York. It's just, I don't know, the whole thing. It just gets really complicated and weird, basically.
I had not thought about that. That really did put my mind in a pretzel. I guess it all comes down to, yeah, I have no idea. I had not thought about that. That's very interesting. I'm fascinated to see what happens with some of these guys when game checks come into play because it's their livelihood. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these guys maybe before the season starts get their first shot or something like that to avoid losing some of those game checks on the road or for Kyrie Irving at home.
We missed Evan Valenti. We love him, and I'm sure he will return next week. Of course, Chris Grenham from Forbes. Really appreciate you hopping on, man. It's been good hanging out, catching up.
For sure. Thanks for having me on, Adam. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff that I always forget to tell you about. Celtics Beat, you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, everywhere else. And check out the CLNS newly formatted or newly designed, constructed website. A lot of hard work went into it. Looks great. Check it out. You can see the podcast, the videos, our CLNS YouTube page, even personality profiles and things along those lines. So we'll talk to you again next week. Preseason games right around the corner. For Chris, I'm Adam. We'll talk to you again soon.